Hello, my name's Lois Scharf. I work for the University of Central Lancashire, and I'm really pleased to be here doing this presentation for this new Eco-Social World conference.
Hi, my name is Gabriel Eichsteller. I'm a learning facilitator with Empra Social Pedagogy, and I'm delighted to be sharing a model around social pedagogy with you that's very much based on our experience as social work educators. Together with Lois, we've gained lots of experience around introducing social pedagogy as a perspective to social workers, because we feel that social pedagogy enables social workers to work with a clear focus on relationship-centered practice, promoting learning and addressing social inequality in ways that improve well-being for both individuals, but also for wider communities and society. And as part of the Co-Building a New Eco-Social World conference, we wanted to introduce you to one social pedagogical concept called the 3Ps that we feel really connects to the summit principle around respect, dignity, harmony, and justice in particular. Social pedagogy and social work clearly play a crucial role in promoting those principles and bringing them to life. It is ultimately about how we convey those principles to people who don't experience them on a day-to-day practice. And our contribution more widely as social pedagogues and social workers lies very much in how we bring values such as respect, dignity, harmony, and justice to the people we support, to those that are most disadvantaged in society.
And so when we think about this, this is a key part, like Gabriel's just said, in all the work that we do, whether you are a social worker, social care, or you work in human services. But it's really important that we think about how we work alongside people, how we think about power, politics, and our position in our relationships. So one of the social pedagogical models that we want, or concepts and ideas that we want to talk to you about today, is the 3Ps. And we think this is a really valuable reflective framework for us to think about how we work alongside with people, showing respect and dignity.
Now, in many human professions and many services for people who are disadvantaged, but also universal services, there's been an increasing emphasis on managerialism, on predetermining outcomes and clearly defining targets and proceduralizing practice. And particularly, we can see that in social work in the UK, for instance, which is, the practice area or the country where we've done most of our work in. And we can see the detrimental impact that that's had, both on practitioners who've come into this field because they have a clear sense of the sheer enormity of social justice issues that we encounter. And they've chosen their profession to stand against social inequality and to determine or have a determination to fight for greater power for disadvantaged groups in societies. But those aspirations very often quickly clash in social work practice within systems that expect professionals to enforce the state's power and to be politically neutral.
And so because of that, we've realised that there's been this real drive, particularly in the UK, we've seen a real drive from not just the professionalism of social workers, but the professionalisation of the service, of the work that we do. And so we've got professional standards, which we're not saying they are needed, they are, but they've become a tick box exercise. They're just something that people need to meet, and we're more focused on whether we meet targets and outcomes than actually about the quality of the work that we're doing when we work alongside people.
So the question for us as social work educators is, how can we make sure that students are really engaged with their own personal motivation, their own values that have brought them into social work in the first instance, and how can we keep that connection, that political determination to promote greater social justice alive within students, especially when they then enter the profession after graduating.
And this is, you know, really, really important when we think about this co-building and co-creating this new eco-social world. You know, we have to have the ability to be really mindful of our own position, our own power, the politics, that our own personal politics, as well as the political systems that we're working in. But we need to be really mindful of all this and be really aware, because particularly if you know, we want to truly work alongside people, work in much more co-creative and co-productive ways. So we're going to give you an example now. We thought this might be really helpful when we kind of discuss the 3Ps and some of these issues that we're going to talk about. So we're going to use an example that I've had in my practice as an academic, as a lecturer. So I had a social work student who was going out on placement. She was in a final year of her social work degree and on her final placement. She was working in a women's refuge. So these were supporting women who had experienced domestic abuse and emotional psychological abuse. And she was running a group setting, because part of the professional competencies is that she had to show that she could run a group. And she was talking to me after this, and she was saying about how she hadn't let any of the women know that she was a student social worker on placement, because very quickly what was happening was they were talking about very negative experiences and very negative viewpoints of social workers. And she was really worried that that would taint the relationship that she had with them. And she was really anxious about what they might say to her and how that might damage the quite fragile relationships that she'd developed with this group of women.
The 3Ps is a Danish social pedagogical model that we like a lot here in the UK. And the reason why is because it articulates that as a person, as a social pedagogue, social worker, or anyone else engaged in human professions, there are three aspects to us that we need to be mindful of. There's the professional self, there's the personal self, and importantly, there's also the private self. And it's that differentiation that makes a key role for how we engage with practice. Basically, the professional self is about how we introduce social workers to their professional role, the specific knowledge, the expertise we expect students to acquire, aspects such as an in-depth understanding of relevant interdisciplinary theory that we want them to gain, insights into the legal and professional frameworks for social work, the kind of methodological skills that we want them to acquire in order to be able to engage well with the people they'll be supporting, as well as the self-reflective skills that will enable them to critically examine and critically reflect on how they can best fulfill their professional role. So all of those things are part of the professional self. The personal self takes this to the next level because it argues that we need to complement the professional with the personal. And that includes bringing our interests, our own values, our life experiences, our personal qualities into practice, as long as those increase the quality of support and as long as they deepen the human-to-human connections that we can build with the people we support. Very often we notice that social workers still have this idea that it's not professional to be personal. And that's why we feel the 3Ps is a really helpful framework, because it differentiates between the personal, the things we are able to bring into practice that make us human, that make us relatable, and the private, the things we will keep out of practice because they don't have a role to play within that. The private self includes all those experiences and aspects that are irrelevant for social work. That might be experiences that are too raw, too unprocessed to bring them into the personal self, because they would likely have a negative impact on the relationship with the person that we are supporting. So it is about making that differentiation between what do we keep private, who are we outside of our professional role when we're with our friends, our family, etc., and what aspects of who we are we able to make part of the personal self and bring into our professional practice, because they enable us to enrich the experience, the learning opportunities, the relationships that we form with the people we support.
So to go back to our example, so to apply the theory, the framework to the example that we've given you, so we can see really clearly that this student was on, like I say, it was in a real kind of bit of a dilemma, and an ethical dilemma she was facing, because she didn't want to upset the women. She didn't want to have that. She felt that she was getting along with them. She was built up this really positive relationship, but she didn't want to spoil any of that or fracture any of that, and didn't want to really kind of take on board any of the negative comments that were being said. And she didn't want them to view her in a different way. So we can see from the example that we can see the three P's, very clearly. So in the professional, this student was very much, she was there. Her role was as a social work student on placement. So that was her role, and she needed to be very clear about that. She was there for a designated time, and then she was going to leave and then hopefully qualify once she finished. So that was her, the professional element of the three Ps for her. The personal was that then she was kind of building up a relationship with people, with the women that were in the group, and she wanted to get to know them and them to get to know her. So she was talking about how she'd shared little bits of information about who she was, and she'd been very personal in her interactions with these women, and quite empathetic at times as well. And then in the private part, there was a private element here, and this is kind of really what was guiding this student's practice, was that she was really fearful and anxious that if they found out about her professional position in the group, that then they would, they wouldn't have anything to do with her, or they would be quite angry, or they would kind of turn the comments on her. So the private aspect for this student was really overriding the professional element. So instead of being really honest about her role and using this as a learning opportunity. So in social pedagogy, we talk a lot about everyday opportunities being learning opportunities. So learning not just happening in formal settings, but actually in informal settings as well. And this student really missed an opportunity to kind of learn and grow and develop her practice, because she didn't want to be admitting the professional role that she had. So like I said, the women in the group knew that she was facilitating the group, but I think they thought that she was just another member of staff or a volunteer. They didn't know that she was a trainee social worker. And I think this example highlights really well how we need to be really mindful about where the motivation and drive is from us as individuals about the work that we're doing. So we can see that for this student, it was coming from the private aspect of her three Ps, because she was very anxious about what these women would say to her.
Lois's example of that student is also really insightful, because it enables us to think about power. And again, we can spread that across the three Ps. We'd argue that all too often we think about power in ways that are kind of simplistic, that kind of suggest that power is a zero-sum game. So it's kind of like a level scale of like, somebody has power because others don't. And if that person gives away any power, then they'll have less and the other persons have more power. What we'd like to argue is basically that power isn't quite like that. And it's important that we don't think about power as a zero-sum game, but that we think about power in a way similar to how love spreads. It multiplies. When we share it with others, we still have the same amount potentially left, but we give it to others, we enable others to take it as well and to share it with the wider world. And so when we use that understanding of power, it changes the way we think about power within a professional context. And again, the professional self here would be connected to what's my formal authority? What power do I formally have by virtue of being a social worker or a social pedagogue or whatever else my job role might be? So that's one dimension of power. But importantly, we need to extend that. We need to critically self-reflect. We need to be really aware of the power dynamics, the structures we're a part of, and how we can facilitate equity for the people we support, how we can share the power, how we can rebalance the power dynamics, and enable others to kind of really be part of that as well. So we need to really carefully think about empowerment and what that means in terms of how we encounter other people, how we create opportunities for empowerment. We need to think about where we need to be advocates for people who don't have a voice within the current system, so we can address the inequality and amplify the voices of people who might not be heard otherwise. And we also need to think about co-production, for instance, about how we can meaningfully engage people from the outset and throughout the entire process, that they're part of decisions that are being made that affect them. Importantly, we also need to think about power from a personal self perspective. We need to think about the informal authority that we bring into our professional role as well, the way we come across. We need to be really self-aware of how powerfully, how dominant we might engage with other people, how we might make other people feel by virtue of how we present ourselves, how we talk, how we articulate ourselves, how we use body language, etc. And how we can therefore role model more nuanced, more equal understanding of power. That means we need to really have a very well fine-tuned ability to connect equally as human to human, which means, again, we need to have that professional self. We need to show humility in those encounters, and we need to show a demonstrable willingness to learn, to role model the fact that we're all equal, we're all human beings, we all make mistakes. So actually being able to demonstrate that we're willing to learn from our mistakes, we don't expect to get everything right, is an important aspect of that as well, is one way in which we bring a critical reflection, a nuanced understanding of power into our professional role. The private self, again, can be really helpful when we differentiate between the professional, the personal, and the private, because there might also be things that I'm not conscious of, or that where I might be uncritically using my own power, my own privilege, that I'm not even aware of. And I think the student example is a really helpful one, because it shows that sometimes we get so absorbed in really understandable dilemmas where we might want to be part of another group where the student clearly wanted to engage and be seen as an equal human being by the moms that were part of that group, that she didn't think about the other aspects of power and what she was role modeling, and what might end up happening later on, as and when the rest of the group would have found out that she was actually a social work student, and how they might have felt like, disempowered and devalued as a result of that. So we need to be really mindful of where might we sort of, because of our needs, get trapped in that drama triangle where we want to come in, we want to rescue, we want to repair harm, and be the knight in shining armor. And we need to kind of make sure that remains part of our private self, that doesn't spill over into professional practice. And we also need to critically reflect on where might our own understanding of power be incongruent with our professional expectations of how we show up in our practice. And what can we do to kind of help ourselves, or for colleagues to help us, to keep that incongruence out of our practice. So there's a lot that we really need to think about with regards to power, and where we feel the 3 Ps can be really quite helpful in that respect.
And then the final one, then we want to talk about the final element, is politics. So again, this is really important. And as the famous quote goes, the personal is political. So politics is a big part of all practice, of all area of work that we do. And particularly when we're thinking about this co-creating and developing this new eco-social world, and part of this conference is about social justice and then thinking about politics and power. So again, we need to think really clearly about the three Ps and the dimensions when it comes to politics. So in the professional domain, we might think about the political kind of influence that political parties or governments or legislation and policy has on the way that it directs the work that we do. And for us as social pedagogues, the key thing here is that we always use our legal and ethical literacy. So we're always thinking about how are we using legislation and policy and political systems to kind of push forward change and positive change in the world around us and in people's lives. How can people become empowered through using legislation and policy? And that's really important. The personal then is very much then thinking about the acts that we can take, so those political acts, the involvement that we can have in politics, that helps kind of develop and co-create and change, make positive change in the world around us. And then the private element of the three Ps is very much thinking about, like Gabriel said, with regards to power, it's very similar in politics. We're going to often come across people with very political, different political views than us. Then we might not agree with them. They might have they might be at one end of the spectrum and you might be at the other, or there might be lots of differences in the way that you see politics. And so what we have to do is be really aware of our political biases or our political views, our points of view, and think about how are they challenged sometimes when we meet other people that maybe have different points of view to us. But that then what we're doing is that we are reflexive enough to think that we're not going to make sure that then influences the way that we respond to somebody. So just because somebody has a different political view to you or is from a different political party or different political class, then how do we work with them? How do we work alongside them? How do we work collaboratively and cooperatively? Or how do we challenge them in a positive way? Or how do they challenge us to learn new things? And that is really important. And again, I think the three Ps gives us a really clear framework to think about that. And it's great that it gets you to think about whose agenda is being pursued here. So if we're talking about collaboration and co-production, then what does that mean? Is that a genuine sense of co-creating the world around us, or is it just a political idea that's been pushed forward to push forward a political ideology? So I think it's really helpful to get us to think about whose agenda is being pursued and whose needs are being met as well. And I think, again, those are really important points of the three Ps, particularly when we start thinking about the private aspect of that framework.
Now, I think it's important to also point out that we all have a private self. That in itself doesn't make us bad social workers or bad human beings. And not everything that's in the private P is negative. Much of it is really very human. We also need to recognize that sometimes we need help to try and keep that out of practice or unaffected by practice. And that's where supervision plays a really, really important role. Both line management supervision, but also peer supervision, potentially making sure between colleagues that nobody has to go home at the end of their day feeling like their private self has been negatively affected by what they've done in a professional context. So there's a lot really that we need to be very, very mindful of in that respect. So the three Ps also enables us to really bring human rights to life in our practice, to make sure that human rights aren't just something that happens in certain situations when it's convenient to us, but actually that they underpin our ethical orientation, that we see it as part of our professional duties to use power in ways that promote other people's human rights, and that we take a political view that supports other people's human rights as well. We also feel that this kind of inclusive understanding of power and politics and that connection to human rights helps us to move away from just being needs-led in our practice and trying to focus on just meeting needs, because ultimately that isn't good enough. That is very short-term, and we need to help people understand what their human rights are. And we need to put our practice in service of human rights. And that starts with the right to human dignity and to being treated with respect. And that's where we feel like the 3Ps brings that kind of approach to life and is really meaningful and purposeful to the people we've supported over the years, because it's really enabled them to make situated judgments and to be more rights-based and to really think hard about how they interact with people, to encounter the others as genuine human beings. So with a more inclusive understanding of power and politics, not as oppositional forces, but as important perspectives that instill human rights and as a foundation for practice, we're able to kind of really connect. We're able to start from what we have in common as human beings and how we can build a deeper understanding of what the political aspects of our work are. Ultimately, they are about how we can enable people to thrive, how we can help them have a sense of meaningful belonging, find connection and solidarity.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Gabriel. And hopefully we both hope that you found that really interesting, and that the 3Ps is something that you can think about using in your everyday work when we're working alongside people. I think, like you were saying, it's really important that we think about, we're really critically reflective, and we think about where power and politics come from and our point in all of that. So hopefully you found that really interesting. We've put our contact details up on the slide on the presentation, so we'd be really interested to hear if you found this interesting, if you've got any questions or just any thoughts in general, because like I say, we were hoping that this is a very quick introduction to a framework that we think is really helpful in helping us navigate those complex and ethical dilemmas and issues of power that we have in everyday practice. So thank you very much.